Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Pensions Committee meeting. Should be very interesting and informative today. I hope you all enjoy it. My name is Andre Camilleri. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Pensions Committee. Eric Kerry is doing an interview, so I'm going to be controlling the meeting until he gets back. So be gentle with me, and I'll do the best I can. Okay. Don't forget that. So, obviously, we've got to be on best behaviour. Before we begin the meeting, I would like to remind those members of the public that are present, placards, banners, advertising materials and similar items are not permitted in any committee meeting and must be covered or removed. Failure to comply may result in the member of the public being asked to leave the meeting. Members of the public should remain seated during any debate and not do anything to endanger the health or safety of any person. Members of the public may record proceedings and report all public meetings. Any person recording the meeting must not disrupt the good order of the meeting. Mobile phones and other electronic devices must be switched to silent. So, that's that. So, that's what we've got to be careful of and for. So, we'll go on to the minutes of the last meeting. Is everybody happy with them? Sorry.
No, if I can speak
Councillor
on...
Waters.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can speak on the accuracy of the minutes, please. If we turn to page 7, item number 6, the first bullet point, it said, members agreed that a specific item to be added to the work programme to review the fund's investment in British and American tobacco. However, it was confirmed later in the meeting that this complete holding had been sold. Well, actually, what happened was I put forward an emergency motion in the meeting to disinvest from tobacco in general. And to look at that, I used British American tobacco as an example. Later on, it was agreed that tobacco should be reviewed as part of the working group. I would also further like to add, it's not accurate to say that the complete holding has been sold, because we do have passive investments, such as the Legal and General Index Tracker, where 3% of that fund is within tobacco, of which British American tobacco is a holding. Similar with the Legal and General US Index at 0.6 is tobacco, of which British American tobacco is a holding within that. So I would like that statement corrected, please, Chairman.
Yeah, what would you like put in its place, Councillor Waters?
In its place, we can say a motion was put forward by a member to disinvest from tobacco. It was agreed by members to put that on the work plan. Something to that effect is more accurate.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a point of clarification from members' services, if I may. I can't remember a motion being put forward. I don't know who the seconder for that was, and I don't know if a vote took place. So before any minutes are changed, can we just clarify if that was the case? And there is a public recording if we're in doubt.
Can we clarify that, Joe?
Well, to clarify, I put forward a motion and it wasn't seconded. Oh. And I put it forward again and it wasn't seconded. Later on, Councillor Pringle suggested it should go on the work plan.
Councillor Pringle.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Councillor Waters for pointing this out, because it did put the motion forward and it wasn't seconded. However, we did have the discussion reference to the tobacco investment that probably members and certainly new members will be unaware of. And we did think that should be, and Schroders had disinvested from that, but that wasn't the whole coverage has been pointed out. So I think it's still prevalent if we can have an updated investment structure relative to the tobacco industry, if that's possible. You're looking at me vacant. Is it possible or not? I know it was. I know because the British and American was a specific thing, but we do have an overarching investment which is still concentrated within that area, even though small amounts, it'd still be good for the committee to understand it.
If I may come in.
Just hold on, just let Joe,
Yeah.
Joe will say something. Tamsin.
I was just going to clarify that what the committee is requesting is some information on the pension fund's investments in tobacco so that we can understand what the holdings are and our exposure in that area.
Okay.
My
what were you
my
doing
understanding was tobacco was going to be reviewed as should we invest in it or not. And we do have companies such as Philip Morris, 5 million, the Marlborough Man. We do have Imperial Tobacco, and it was to review it on the working plan, which we can come back to an agenda item number 12 to make sure it is added in.
well, we'll change the word to say that we're going to review it. Would that be
Thank you, Chairman.
okay?
Yes.
That's fine. Thank you. So we'll move on. Anybody else got any on the minutes? Could I have a seconder? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Happy to second it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a vote on those, please? All those in favour? Thank you. Thank you. Item 2, to note the change in the Nottingham City Council representation with the replacement of Councillor Sam Webster with Councillor Zafrin Khan. And I've got to ask the committee to note the change of representation. Right, thank you. Apologies for absence. Joe, have we got any apologies for absence?
Thank you. We have a few for you this morning. We've had apologies from Councillor David Lloyd from Newark and Sherwood District Council, Sue Reader, who's the scheduled bodies representative, Alan Woodward, who is one of our union representatives, and both Councillors Anne Peach and Zafran Khan from Nottingham City Council.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 4, declarations of interest by members and officers. Do any members or officers present have any disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Do any members or officers present have any private interest, either pecuniary or non-pecuniary, to declare? I think that is a no then. Right, moving on to item 5, which is local government pension scheme breaches. Before I hand over to John to present this report, I move the recommendations as set out on page 12 of the agenda pack, which asks the committee to adopt the procedure outlined in the policy document to record and report statutory breaches of the LGPS regulations. Can I have a second for that?
Unless Councillor Kerry was to second it, I'm happy to do so. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll hand over now to John Clues, pension manager. John.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee. The purpose of the report is to inform committee of the policy and processes being used by the Nottinghamshire Pension Fund to identify, record and report statutory breaches of the LGPS and related regulations. Just as a note, the fund is required to comply with the Pension Regulators Code of Practice, and the policy documents outlines the decision process of reporting breaches of law as they apply to the management and administration of the fund. Just as an example, just to give you a bit of context, I have previously reported to committee where scheme employees have not provided their statutory data to enable the fund to produce pension benefit statements. This is regarded as a statutory breach. And so the pension fund on occasions has reported scheme employees to the pensions regulator. The policy is really just formalising what we already do and ensuring that we have a log of breaches. So also attached to the report is a log of what information the pension fund is required to record when a breach is identified. The record will also ensure that the pension fund can mitigate any recurrence, and it's therefore recommended that the committee adopt the procedure.
Has anyone got any questions? Councillor Kerry.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Clues, the key point really is that where there are breaches, that there are actions and remedies. Is there a timescale that you would normally apply to that, or does that depend on complexity of the breach, or how does that work?
It does actually depend on the breach, but certain breaches, like the example I've given, if we're not able to issue pension benefit statements, or we don't have, or we can't plan to issue benefit statements, we do have to report to the pensions regulator as soon as possible. So generally we issue pension benefit statements in August. We generally come across issues when we're doing that with scheme employers. For example, as I said, not providing data. We then obviously talk to the scheme employers, work through a process, and we generally have a second run of benefit statements in October, November time to try and catch up with those that go missing. So generally we don't report, but there have been occasions, as I've said, where we haven't been able to produce benefit statements, and hence reporting to the regulator.
Councillor Pringle.
Thanks, Chairman. I understand the reason for this, and I think the word breach and report immediately puts fear into everybody, and I think both you and Sarah have moved milestones to develop this to where we are today. So if you report a breach, is there a positive response? And do we not see somebody that the next time that we require something, there's a further breach? Do they tend to join in with the game? And if so, then... Then if so, breach and understanding, as I say, puts a lot of fear out there.
Yeah. It's the terminology breach is the regulator's terminology. Generally, what we tend to do, because clearly you don't want to go to the regulator very often, and the ones where we have recorded it, the regulator actually comes back to the fund and asks us to say what we've done about it, and then we report back to say, we've contacted the employer, we've worked with them, and we've got a plan to improve that breach. So that's the general nature of, and then we report back to the regulator, say, yes, we've done this, that, and the other, and then we go on our merry way, and we monitor if there's an improvement the following year. We do actually charge some scheme employers for additional work because they have breached, and we've sent out letters only last week to a number of scheme employers where we've had to do extra work to ensure that we've managed to produce their benefit statements on time. So and that's picked up in the admin strategy that I've also brought to committee previously. So we have a process by which we monitor scheme employers. What this policy actually does is just puts it into a more structured manner, so that if we get challenged, we've got a structure in terms of going back to the scheme employer and saying, but you haven't done X, Y, or Z.
Chair, if I can, so all the scheme suppliers will have this briefing and will understand what we're asking them to do as any changes that we put forward, so they're absolutely fully aware of their responsibilities to us?
They already have that as part of the admin strategy. I was going to bring this report actually prior to the pandemic, and so really we're already doing it. It's just I'm just covering off a proper policy to make sure that we can reflect on it.
Sarah?
Thank you. I was just going to add to that. As you'll be aware, committee, we currently have a year-end process where scheme employers submit the year-end document with starters, leavers and changes. As part of our transformation programme, obviously our plans are to move to monthly returns. So I think what that will enable us to do is to work with those scheme employers that may have difficulty in providing the year-end return, so that much earlier in the year, if we're having issues in them providing a monthly return, we can get on top of it at that point. I think the other issue here links into our data audit and improvement. So as that work comes to an end and we move to business as usual, and therefore data is available, that's going to support scheme employers to fulfil all of their statutory obligations as well. Thank you.
Councillor Moore.
Just a simple question, really. Do you use e-training for the members of who you send this out? Do you use electronic training for them?
We generally have a meeting with them. We don't have e-training as such, but we do have a meeting with them each year, inviting scheme members to come along to go through the year-end process. And we do encourage those that, let's say, don't quite meet the requirements to come along as well, and to engage in that those meetings and that training that we do offer.
Yeah, just from experience, that with some of these smaller employers, that e-training that they can do at their own time, at their own convenience, that you produce is very useful. And I've actually been doing some of it myself this week, so to get myself up to date. So I did find it useful. I don't know whether it's a tool that you wish to use or not. It's only an idea.
Sarah, you want to respond?
We might be going to say the same thing, actually. All scheme employers have the support of the employer support and compliance team, so they're available to them at all times. You know, if they have individual queries, questions, they can come through to that team as well. And the events that John was talking about have been run virtually as well as in a face-to-face capacity. But I think your point is a valuable one, and certainly John and I'll have a discussion about it. Thank you.
Can I just come back to that?
Yeah,
Chair?
yeah.
Just adding one more thing. You mentioned about the small employers. Generally, to be quite honest, it's more the larger employers that have issues.
Thank you, Chair. Quick question about the decision tree. The amber and red. Do we have many amber and red occurrences, and are they actually reported back to committee as numbers or as actual individuals? Thank you.
Fortunately, we don't have many the red ones, but I will be reporting back to committee on the amber and red, hence why I've produced that the breaches log, so that I'll be putting it into the performance report when I bring it back in June. I have reported back employers on occasion where we've identified them. This is just formulating that process.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, anybody else? Any more questions? If I could just say, the breaches, is it more in line with the Financial Service Conduct Authority? In financial services, breaches have been in place for a long time, and amber, green and red, and it warns them. If it's a small breach, you get a warning. If it gets to red, then it's quite serious. So it's something that needs to be doing, so we can, obviously we're looking after pensioners' money, and we don't want breaches of that. And yeah.
Can I come back to that?
Yep.
Earlier on in the year, I reported back to committee we were having problems with our AVC provider. We didn't actually report to the pensions regulator, but a number of funds did report the AVC provider to the pension regulator, and in fact the AVC provider also reported themselves as a breach. So these are the kind of things that we'll be logging on the log going forward.
Yeah, and it does stay on the file, so you're always aware of these companies that aren't falling into line. So if there's no more questions, we'll go to a vote. So all those in favour of the recommendations, please show of hands. Thank you. Yep. Okay, none against. That's carried. Now I'd like to point to hand over to the proper chairman for the rest of the meeting. Would you like to come up? Councillor Coe? No, it's all right. I want to relax a little bit so I can. don't say that. Don't say that. It's paranoid already. So we'll move in. You've done a great job. Thank you very much.
Well done. Thank
you.
Well.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's more on the edge with me, isn't it? That's why.
And your pen and paper. Where's my bits? Those bits here. Have you read that? Thank you. Apologies for my slightly late arrival. I was on other business for a few moments earlier. Thank you. Okay. So when Andre is settled down, we'll move on to item number 6, which is transforming pension administration report. Before I hand over to Sarah, who's going to present the document, I'll ask if we can, I'll move the recommendations on page 34 of the report. Seconder, please. Thank you. Okay, so if you'd like to introduce the report.
Thank you. So this morning's report is to provide members with an update on the data audit and improvement work stream within the Pension Administration Transformation Programme. As work on the data work stream has progressed, it's become increasingly clear that this is the critical work stream to the entire programme. The programme is consolidating all work on data validation and the work stream. As members know, the fund holds 2 types of data for each member. Common data, which is used to identify scheme members and includes information such as name, address, etc. The second type of data it holds is scheme-specific, which is essential to the calculation of benefits. So we hold information such as contributions, pensionable pay, and events such as transfers and purchase of additional pension. Work to date has supported the fund to significantly improve these data scores, and these are shown in the table at paragraph 12. Committee will also be fully aware of the other external projects that we've been working on, which are the Guaranteed Minimum Pension and the MacLeod Court of Appeal judgment, which will also support data improvement. The data workstream has reviewed data for over 138,000 members, covering over 180 separate pension folders. The table at paragraph 16 shows that work to date has resulted in over 66 pension records now passing all of our 430 checks. So that's an increase of 42,000 from the start of September 2020. Phase 3 of the work stream has been the most extensive. In the previous report, it was only possible to estimate the work required to determine the extent of stages 3 and 4 within phase 3. A number of bulk fixes have now been developed. It is anticipated that once applied, the bulk fixes will resolve a further 27% of the required amendments. The remaining data validation amendments will then require work to be undertaken with individual scheme employers. Work has already begun on this with a pilot scheme employer to shape this work. Employers with less than 20 outstanding data validation amendments will be addressed through business as usual. To complete the final stage of phase 3, funding of £264,300 is required. As with all phases to date, resourcing this activity will be a blend between the Pension Office and Civica, our partner. Once the data audit improvement baseline is complete, we move to ongoing data maintenance. This will be supported through the deployment of monthly returns and members' self-service. Members will also be aware that we've been rolling out the Scheme Employers Portal, and this has continued. And by the end of December, all district and borough councils, including the county, but not the city, will be live by December 2021. With the City Council, we have separate administration arrangements that have direct access into our system, so we'll be working with them separately to look at how this will work going forward. We've also already engaged with 2 large educational employers as well. The Pensions Office already seeing the benefits of the deployment of the portal. It provides scheme employers with a secure route to submit data. It provides scheme employers with increased access to their members' pension record, and it improves turnaround time. And it also supports our ongoing data improvement. The recommendations are for the Pension Committee to approve the recharge of the £264,300 to the fund and agree to receive ongoing reports. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I mean, this is very important. This is, again, continuing a long process since we started looking at transformation a few years ago now. Hopefully we're getting nearer to the end. Can I just ask one question before I open it up for others? The procurement cost of £264,300, how do we know that that provides value for money in terms of the cost?
So we have a procured partner where we've been through a procurement exercise originally a number of years ago. We brought a report to committee, I think it was sometime last year, to re-award that contract to Civica. So it has been through the proper contract procurement route, and this additional work is covered within that contract. We always engage with the procurement team here to ensure that we're complying with all our procurement regulations.
Thank you for that clarification. I'd like to open up any questions or comments, please. Mike, Councillor Pringle.
Thanks, Chairman. And again, this is an ongoing report that we see benefiting for the pension scheme in the future, so fully support it. I think, is this the last payment that we sort of looked at from last year? Or is it going to be another... ask for further funding, that's all. Yeah.
So this is additional funding to the funding that's already been agreed, and where we've obviously spent that money. The report I brought in September 2020, we were only able to estimate the costs for stages 3 and 4, and obviously what we've been doing is then refining that. So this is that final amount of money for that particular phase. Obviously what we want to do is to continue, once we've done all of this work, to maintain our data, and as part of the work with Civica we will have access to data dashboards that will enable us to give access to each scheme employer, so they too can monitor where they are regarding their common and scheme specific data. And I think perhaps what we would want to do is to provide a report back to committee to show the positioning of scheme employers over a year, where they sit in, say, like 4 quartiles of data, and where we may be able to provide additional support to scheme employers to move up and continue to improve the data that they're providing to the fund. Data's key to absolutely everything here. Thank you.
Answer your question, Mike.
Perfect, as ever from Sarah. So can we add that on to the work
It will be
programme
on
to
the
get a
it will
report
be,
back from
yeah.
Sarah? Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Councillor Wheeler.
Sarah's largely answered what I was going to ask about providing a further report. And Mike, thank you, Mike, for asking that question as well. Also, Sarah has said very eloquently, all you can ever do is estimate something, and it has to come back when further costs are known. So, yeah, thank you, Sarah, for a very good report and for the explanation given to committee members this morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll... Sorry, did you want to say something?
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to add, just as an addition, just to put in a bit more context, the pension fund is required by the regulator to have have a data improvement plan anyway, and we've already said that. But going forward, and it was only reported in the last week, probably 2 weeks, when we had a pension managers meeting, that the LGPS is going to be in one of the first tranches for the new government, what's it called? National Dashboard, thank you. And so this is really important in terms of getting that data right so that we can actually provide data to the National Dashboard, which is envisaged to be sometime in 2023. So I just wanted to add that as a bit more context.
But irrespective of that, this is the kind of stuff we need to be doing anyway to improve our efficiency, improve our accuracy, etc., etc. Thank you for the extra bit of information, Mr. Clues. Okay, I don't see any more questions or comments, so we'll move to the vote, please. All those in favour of the recommendations, please. Any against or abstentions? No, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Item number 7 is the Pension Fund Treasury Management report for 2021. Again, before I hand over to Kieran, who's going to present the report, can I ask for, can I move the recommendation on page 39 and ask for a seconder, please?
Yeah, I'll second that and reserve the right.
Thank you. Kieran.
Thank you, Chair. It's standard practice to report on Treasury management activity 3 times a year, once to lay out the strategy before the year starts, once at the mid-year point and once after the year has ended, and this is the mid-year report for 21-22. This responsibility on pension fund cash has been delegated to the Pension Fund Committee since April 2020. Treasury management activity only focuses on, if you like, the cash deposits of the pension fund, not its longer-term investments that it makes for the sake of growing the size of the fund. Treasury management is more concerned with security of the cash balances, whilst they kind of sit with the pension fund and ability to pay out cash as and when required. Not necessarily with making the highest return, but making an optimum return within the constraints of security and liquidity. In 21-22, as the table shows in paragraph 7, the mid-year balance of cash deposits was £150,600,000, and at that point that was held at 2 banks, Bank of Scotland and Lloyds, and 3 money market funds, which are BlackRock, Aberdeen Standard and Federated. Just to give an idea of what that cash would typically be required for, paragraph 9 lists the investment commitments that as at 30th September we estimated as being possible demands for cash, totaling some 287 million, some of which would have been required within a matter of days, like for example Schroders buying equities, some much more longer term, possibly over many months or even years, as we've made several commitments to private equity funds and infrastructure funds. And finally, just to note that the one comparator that we've used on all Treasury management reports, not just for pension fund but for council cash, over the years, the LIBID rate, the London Interbank bid rate, is disappearing from the end of this year and will be replaced with something not dissimilar called SONIA, Sterling Overnight Index Average. As a rule, though, that new index runs a bit higher than what LIBID did. That's just for information. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Kieran. Very important we look after our money in the right way. It's a significant amount of money, but obviously quite a small proportion of the total size of the fund. Are there any other questions or comments for Kieran, please, from the members of the committee? Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, but our holdings seem to be maintained on a short-term basis, but if you listen to what the demand is, it's medium-term, a lot of it, and if you see the table, then there's only one immediate in there. And we are getting a very, very low rate, and I understand that rates are low, but it does seem, I'm just wondering whether we can't at least make some medium-term investments of a base of the cash, where we would get a better return. Now, it may well be that that's not possible, but certainly it would be my instinct. But what do I know? So I don't know a great deal. I'd be very interested to know how other pension funds manage their cash balances. Okay. And whether they do any medium-term lending in order to increase their rates.
Okay, Tamsin will come back on that, but just to say that some of the money has already been spent and or is being spent on properties, you may be aware. Tamsin would like to answer that, please.
Yes, just to say that we've been discussing cash investments in some detail over the last few months, and we are putting into effect the decisions that have been made at committee to put some of that cash into longer term investments at a slightly higher rate, still being prudent with our money while the money is drawn to the down to the investments where we actually want it to be held.
Right on the money, as the term would say, Graham. Well done.
I did raise it.
Well done, you did.
We need credit. I also want a rake up.
We do. We will.
Right. Councillor Camilleri.
There is only one proviso, and the markets are still ramping ahead, aren't they? And everybody's happy. But I've been in a situation where the markets have collapsed, and by luck or good management, I managed to move clients' money into cash. So moving the cash, it wants to be thought out, not sending big lumps of money into medium-term investments. Because if the market goes down, that can affect it as well. So it needs to be a drip feed into some medium-term investments rather than a big lump of cash, I think, because that could happen, and it will happen. When?
Yeah. Sorry, that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay.
Are we having a report back on what you're going to do once you've done your deliberations?
Oh.
Some of that was a bit theoretical, because obviously it's something that's being done over a number of quarters, and the numbers change underneath us, so the actual specific numbers wouldn't change. I report on the quarterly investment position every quarter, and those changes will be reflected.
Fine, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Moore, and when you finish, can you turn your speaker off? Because that was why Tamsin wasn't working. So
Sorry.
You're off. Yes, okay. Thank you.
I didn't realise I hadn't worked out the technology.
Thank you.
With Treasury Management, do you have rules how long you can invest with certain banks, like say Bank of Scotland? I know only it's a district, which is slightly different because we're just rolling money over all the time and it's not for pension purposes, but you know, some of the banks were only allowed to invest with them for 24 hours and are part of our Treasury Management rules. And I don't know. And I've never heard of Insight MMF and LGIM MMF. I see you've been in there and got out of there. I just wonder whether somebody could educate me who they are and are they a safe place to put money?
Yeah, Insight, LGIM, BlackRock, JP Morgan, Aberdeen and Federated, they're all money market funds. So they're not one that you would put your own personal savings in. They're more for operations like the pension fund. And they are considered the safest places to put cash, because the money market funds themselves only invest in very short-term bits of paper, really, in order to get the safest and at a fairly low rate of return. And we've not really come out of Insight and LGIM. That just happens to be the balance as at the end of September. We use all the money market funds day in, day out, really. It just depends how much cash we have on the day, or how much cash we need on the day, and we take it from the money market funds themselves. And we do have limits stipulated by the they're originally stipulated by the council, and the pension fund, when it was delegated the if you like the authority of looking over the pension fund treasury management activity, you know, adopted the same limits that the council has. Now, whether the pension fund would want to review those limits for its own cash balances is another matter, but that would explain why we're a bit constrained as a pension fund just on our cash balances in the kind of long-term, higher return investments that we could make. And indeed, some banks over 3 months were offering negative interest rates, whereas the money market funds were offering a generous 0. So it's not necessarily the case that the longer you put money out for, the greater return you'll get.
Does that answer your question?
Well, pretty much so, but I think obviously your priority is security over getting a better investment rate, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just be interested to know, on the money market funds, some can still have comparatively high charges compared to what we're getting in interest, and are any of those funds at risk? I mean, is it pure cash and currency, or are you looking at notes and short-term lending where there's a possibility, but unlikely, but the fund could actually go down? And are we getting above inflation?
We don't really see the charges that the money market fund makes, because they're all wrapped up in the interest rate they pay. So the rates that we report and that we actually accrue the net of those charges. They are the only ones we invest in are sterling ones, so there's no currency risk in those. We've not experienced yet any wobbles with any of the money market funds over the years. They're all rated AAA, and as far as I know, there's never really been a run on a money market fund. There is a risk in all investments, obviously, but the money market fund, the money market funds will probably tend to invest in much the same investments themselves. So, if you like, there is a hidden risk in investing in money market funds. It looks like you're spreading your cash around over different funds, but that cash might then like congeal at the far end, where the different money market funds have invested in the same thing, same bit of paper, the same credit note or something like that. So that's something that you've got to be aware of, but money market funds themselves, as I said, are still considered safer than banks because they themselves spread the cash and they don't lend it for. I think they aim to achieve an average length of investment themselves of 90 days. So as a rule, they've got cash coming in every day into their funds, and we can call cash at very short notice from those funds if we need it.
And I think the key point was the comment you made about AAA ratings in terms of security. Does that answer your question, Councillor Waters? Is that okay? Thank you. I don't see any more indications, so can we please vote on the recommendation on page 39? All those in favour, please. Anybody against? Any abstentions? No, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to item number 8, which is proxy voting on page 41. The recommendation is on page 43, on paragraph 11. I'll move that recommendation.
I'll second that,
Thank
Chair.
you very
and
much.
reserve the right.
Thank you. And Kieran, I think that's yourself again to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is the routine report on the voting of the holdings of the pension fund undertaken by Hermes in the quarter to June of this year. In summary, paragraph 5 says that Hermes voted on a total of about 25,000 resolutions at various general meetings, annual general meetings taking place in that quarter. Paragraph 6 shows that they voted against or abstained on 3,000 to 4,000 resolutions of those 25,000. The large pie chart shows a breakdown of how those 3,656 resolutions, the different topics, if you like, that they covered. 50% approximately was related to board structure, and a further 28% on remuneration. The thing is, this doesn't quite give the analysis that we would often like to see regarding the hot topics such as climate change, etc., because those topics will be embedded in these various resolutions relating to, say, board structure, or the shareholder resolutions that are also a sizable chunk of the resolutions. But this is the, if you like, the limitations of the information that we receive from Hermes via LGPS Central. And as for topics such as climate change, I would, well, we cover that thing in the LAP business meeting report that is next on the agenda. But all the voting activities shown on the pension fund's website, the summary reports and the individual resolutions and annual general meetings are listed at great length on our pension fund website. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kieran. I completely understand your comment about the description of those of the voting analysis. It's very difficult to really understand what that relates to about specific strategies and plans within those boards. Is there any way that we can look at trying to improve the reporting? So that you mentioned climate change. A lot of work has been done, and there's been a lot of board movements. For example, the Exxon one that was done earlier, to help us understand what the underlying impact of those resolutions and votings were.
It would require, I think, liaison with LGPS Central and Hermes, because the information they provide doesn't analyse it across that kind of more interesting way of breaking the issues down. Whether they could give individual, if you like, narratives connected to individual annual general meetings that have been attended and explain the key topics that came up at those as a way of illustrating a small section of the voting activity of the quarter. Maybe they could be.
I think Tamsin wants to come in and add something to that.
Which actually, if members want that in more detail, that is in the quarterly engagement reports, which I would recommend as they can make interesting
the best one.
reading.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
However, I have discussed this particular issue with Central, and they are considering what might be possible. But I suspect, because of the complexity of analysing what the vote is and why there was a vote against, say, a particular board member, you won't ever get the full picture just from the counting of votes.
No, I totally understand the complexity of it. Are there any questions from members, please? Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I totally understand the difficulty with the reporting standards on this, but I think from the union perspective, they're frustrated with the fact that we do a lot of talking, but they cannot physically see the results that we know are coming back to us. And I would hope that somehow we can actually get some form of report where we can literally blow our own trumpet, put out into the media saying this is what we've been doing and these are the results we're getting. Thank you, Chair.
I agree with everything you said, Chris. We are trying to do that. We're trying to improve comms, etc. Absolutely. Councillor Waters, Lee.
Yeah. Well, as a rarity, I think I pretty much agree with everything said so far. But looking at this report, it is so vague. I don't know what has been voted for. Has that been a positive vote for? I don't know what we're abstaining against. I don't know what's been voted against. There isn't enough detail in this. When I know we've been given links to delve further down into it, members of the public aren't going to do that. So for greater transparency, it'd be useful if we could have a snapshot of a few items we have voted for, abstained and against, and a rationale as to why that's happened, an improvement of comms. Thank you, Chairman.
I think the answer to that is the lack for information that Tamsin mentioned, the quarter reports. But do you want to come back on that, Tamsin?
Yes, certainly you will find that kind of example in the quarterly reports, which are all published on the website as well as circulated to members on a quarterly basis.
Councillor Chapman.
Yes, sorry, this is really important because if we are going along the lines of engagement, and there's a justification for engagement, but it's only justification for engagement if engagement ends up by an improvement in the performance of the firms in terms of, well, not just financially, but in terms of what their impact on the planet. Now, if that is the case, we need to illustrate the impact we're having. Right, and therefore we need a performance management system which is illustrating that, and this is an integral and an absolutely essential part of the performance management system, so that we can say, look, we voted against this with this in this particular sector, right, and it has had made this difference. Because I'll be raising this issue later on. So it's not just a question of comms, it's a question of if we're going to have an impact, be seen to be having an impact, right, then this information is absolutely critical. So we need to be really insistent on getting proper information back, and this is inadequate, as everybody's agreed.
I can absolutely assure you that we are looking at ways to try and improve it, Graham, because we talk about this regularly, as you know.
We're going in the right direction.
Councillor Pringle, you were next on the list.
Yeah, just to follow on from what members are saying, really, I think the most interesting point of the paper, and there's no disrespect here, is the against and abstention votes, because at what point do we vote against, or whom is supporting vote against? Because I don't understand what their cut-off point is for that, or what their direction is in following that. And I can completely understand supporting something and voting against something, but the abstention is something in this that I have no idea why anybody would abstain against voting on a topic. You're either for it or against it, I would have thought. So it'd be really nice to understand their vote intentions, and you're going to tell me it's on the website, aren't you?
Okay, so let me try. Can I, before Tamsin could try and put that in perspective? So, if you imagine the amount of meetings and the amount of votes that go on, it's an incredibly large amount of stuff going on, and that's why we have partners that we entrust some of that that work too. So Hermes, LAP, etc., LGPS Central and all that. So I think we can set the strategy, we can set our policy, if you like, on that we prefer engagement. And it's not just on climate change, it's on several of the things in environmental, social and governance issues globally. So it's far wider than that. And I think we have to entrust the people that we work with to do the right thing. And we do have LAPFA meetings where we can feed back into that process. So I think we can sometimes get into too much detail. I think the key thing is to ensure that the overarching strategy is right and that those people are helping us, the partners are helping us to deliver it. Is that, do you understand?
If I can, Chairman, I completely understand, but I don't agree. The scrutiny is within the detail, and if you're going to present something in the report and tell me that we've abstained, or Hermes have abstained 3,650 or voted against within that period, my question is, I'm not sure how, or I'm not sure I understand exactly what that is. And if it's difficult, I understand it, but if you do it once for me, I completely understand in the future.
Please, Tamsin.
Right, thank you. Yes, I mean, the detail is on the website and you can go and look at a particular vote and see how it was cast, and at least some of the time there is a narrative that goes with it. As far as the abstentions go, I think those are sometimes used as part of the engagement process, in that where Hermes are already engaged, or Central are already engaging with a company, and they've moved a bit but maybe not as far as you would like, you might recognise that by abstaining rather than voting against, and it sends a sort of signal that if we don't see more action, it'll be a vote against next time. So it's sort of a part of their negotiation.
And so what we have is, we have a report which tells me we're against and abstaining. In actual fact, we're engaging in the best possible way for the pension fund, which is really what I was asking for. And that was a perfect explanation. Thank you.
And putting that into context, voting at AGMs isn't the only thing that investment managers do. They talk to companies all the time and influence their strategy and their forward plan. So this is a snapshot, if you like, of some of the work that they do. I think
again, I get that. I absolutely get that. And this is a public paper. And in the public paper, it tells me we voted against. We abstained 3,506 times. Without telling me that some of the abstentions will be because there is continued engagement. That would have eradicated my question and come back to you, to be quite honest.
I'm sure that line could be added into a future report. Absolutely. Councillor Camilleri, I think you were next.
It is quite important, actually, isn't it? Because we're voting to put our policies in place. Are we clear what our policies are? Are we very clear what we want these companies to vote for? Is that what we're here for? Set the strategy, set the policy. I don't know. I think it's we'll get all this information, and what we're going to do with it when we get it. That's the question. So somebody's abstained on whatever reason. Councillor Pringle says, what we're going to do with the information we get it. Do we want them all to vote exactly the same so we get that way? I don't know. There's a lot of companies here and a lot of different views and a lot of different things. I'm just a bit concerned of where it's all leading to. That's my opinion.
We have, certainly for the votes which are cast by Hermes on our behalf, we have because they're doing that on behalf of the whole pool, we have a pool-wide agreed policy, which, is it attached to the report? Or is it a background paper? We can certainly make sure we circulate that next time. And I was thinking, given these questions, whether to suggest this for a topic for the RI training for next year, for Central to particularly look at voting and voting policies and how that ties into our wider engagement activity.
Chair, could I just go on? So this committee, we make the decisions that go forward. Have we had a debate on how we want companies to vote, or how we want companies to go, or where are these decisions being made from? Has it been made from I mean, I'm neutral, so I don't know. Have you had a policy, this is how we vote, we don't vote, we don't want that, we don't want this, we don't want the other, if we do that, we're not going to vote for it? Or is it left to Hermes to do, or to officers to decide?
There has, in the past, it has come to committee. The involvement of the pool has made things more complicated because we need a pool-wide policy. So what's happened is that the Nottinghamshire voting policies, which, to be fair, were very similar to the others of our partners within the pool, they have all been combined, and I don't think there have been any material changes to how the committee originally directed that their votes should be cast. But it certainly sounds like it would be worth making sure that that policy was shared. I mean, it's there, it's out there, it's accessible, but it sounds like it would be worth bringing that back to a training session or similar.
Yeah, I just think we need a bit more. We do need that conversation, and it's very important.
Okay, Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chairman. Just calling back to Schroeder once alluded to, they fell off the UK stewardship code for climate change and all the rest of it, so messed up the paperwork. How do I know, so they claim, how do I know that Hermes haven't abstained because it's been an issue with the paperwork and they just haven't turned up to vote?
Oh my God. My comment is, I understand that strategic issue, whether they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but how do you build that into the minutiae of individual investment decisions? Is some, if you wish to go to that level, I'm sure you can find the time to do it. That's why we have partners that I understand. I understand. Okay. Do you need to add to that, Tamsin?
I was only just going to comment that an absent vote is not the same as an abstention.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Introna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being new to this committee as well, I've just got a simple question. I noticed that the voting principles paper was March 2019. May I just ask, how often do we review the voting principles, and how often do we have that alignment discussion with Hermes, please?
Okay.
I don't want to give the wrong answer to this, because, as I say, it has changed a bit in that we've had to change our process as part of working alongside Central. Central will be looking at this with Hermes on a very regular basis. They have quarterly meetings and they review the policies at least once a year. I would have said, from a Nottinghamshire point of view, it probably follows the should be looked at every 3 years, in the same way as our strategies are required to be reviewed every 3 years.
Okay, so that's next year?
Yes.
Next year. And I think the important thing is that the investment managers integrate ESG, responsible investment, into their investment decisions too. So, and we've had training from all of our managers in recent times, and we'll have more, no doubt, in the future. So they do understand, I'm sure, the underlying strategy that we have in terms of ESG and engagement. Is that a fair comment? Thank you. Okay, so Councillor
Chair,
Moore?
can I just come back just to say I think it was real positive. Sorry, I think it was really positive when you said that across the LTP Central that we were pretty much aligned with our voting. I suppose that was something that I was not aware of, so that was a very positive thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Councillor Moore.
Yeah, just looking at the big picture, 1,800 times they voted against the board structure. Do we have any breakdown of why they voted against the board? Was it diversity? Was it the mix of the board, or particular people on the board? Or that would be an interesting one for the... I'm not asking the question now, but it is a massive chunk of the votes, and it would be very interesting to know why Hermes voted against the board structure. Maybe the Hermes guy doesn't like particular people on the board. There's another second point I'd like to make, which normally these reports here are extremely detailed and accurate. There is one sentence I've got to question, and that is paragraph 7. Additionally, some of the votes against board members may be because of their attitude to such issues as climate change, but they may be not. That is my point. Thank you. There is no proof at all in the report. There is no facts at all in the report to say that some of the votes against board members may because of their attitude. And I really don't like sentences like that in reports if you can't back it up.
Yeah, sorry, that is my sentence. So my apologies, that is a fair comment. And if you asked me to point to a specific example, that I couldn't do that off the top of my head. However, I would say that because of the way AGMs are set up, there are only a certain number of things which always go to AGMs to be voted on. So that is the problem, is that most of the votes are all to do with board structure, remuneration, dividends, report and accounts, reappointment of the auditors. They're all standard items, and those will always make up the majority of the number of votes. So sometimes if you're trying to vote against the way a company is behaving, you will look for the best vote that you can do that in, and quite often it will be to do with the appointment of directors or the structure of the board.
I take your point, thank you, but I really think that paragraph can't be backed up and ought to be taken out of the report. So.
I think the idea is this is a summary report. There's lots and lots and lots of stuff under this on the website, etc. So the semantics of that sentence, obviously Tamsin agrees it's not the best. So I hope that answers your comment. Thank you. I don't see any more questions or comments, so we'll move to the vote, please. All those in favour of the recommendation? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? So we have an abstention, Councillor Waters. That's carried. Thank you. Move on to item number 9, which is the Local Authority Pension Reform, LAPFA, business meeting report. So I'll move the recommendation on page 46 before Councillor Camilleri disappears out of the room. Thank you. And I'll ask Kieran to introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report covering the last two LAPFA meetings held via Zoom in July and October. As per usual, I just pluck out one of the more salient issues discussed at each of the meetings. In the July meeting, it's heavily weighted towards the various LAPFA policies on zero carbon and the various engagements that LAPFA undertakes on its members' behalf on zero carbon initiatives. In the October meeting, the focus was more on human rights issues regarding mining operations in terms of health and safety in those mining operations and engagement with the communities affected by mining operations. And finally, to highlight that the quarterly engagement reports that LAPF produces are attached as background and freely available on the LAPF website. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kieran. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I welcome this report, particularly the fact that the LAPFA meetings were held over Zoom. I wonder if that's a new thing, because point 5 is all about the July meeting, heavily focused on climate, and I suppose that members of LAPFA were cutting down their own carbon footprint by not getting on a train or driving to the meetings and back as they're over Zoom. So is that going to continue to back up what they're focusing on, please?
Well, originally they went to Zoom because of the lockdown. Now that lockdown is being slowly lifted and restrictions are lifted, the LAPFA have recently sent out a survey to the usual attendees, asking if they would want to return to having regular meetings in London or elsewhere in the country, or keep it as Zoom meetings. So I'd be interested myself to see what the results of that survey are when they're finally compiled and released. But I'm sure people are taking the climate aspect of that into account.
And if I may just come back on that, thanks for that. If Nottinghamshire County Council is serious about our declaration of a climate emergency, then I would encourage us to be responding to that survey to say that we'd stick with Zoom to back up our own convictions as well.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I would prefer to not go to London myself, but I think a nicer places to visit actually. But yeah, from the comfort of my own dining room is good enough.
Your point is well made, Councillor Smith. Councillor Pringle.
Just to applaud Kieran, because I've been one of the members that's been to the LAF meetings, and prior to COVID or climate risk being an issue, once travelled down to London, Kieran was the only one in attendance that rode from the station on his own bicycle. So, you know, Kieran is ahead of the steer with regard to anything like it.
Thank you for that amount of detail, Mike. Thank you. Okay. I don't see any more questions or comments. So if we'll move to the vote then on the record, all those in favour? Are there anyone against or any abstentions, please? We have one abstention. So the recommendation is carried. Okay. Moving on to item 10, which is the Climate Action Plan report, and the recommendation is on page 59 of the report after the table. So I'll move that recommendation. Can I have a seconder, please?
Second that and reserve the right.
Thank you very much. Okay. Tamsin, would you like to take us through the report, which is based on all the hard work we've all done in recent times?
Thank you, Chair. Members are aware that the Pension Fund received the first climate risk report in September last year. This climate risk report was issued to Nottinghamshire Pension Fund with a number of recommendations which have become the Fund's Climate Action Plan, which was approved last October.
Tamsin, can I just interrupt you for a moment, please? I'd like to address the gallery. I think you've heard very much that we would like to continue the meeting. You've put a banner up which is not allowed. Can I sincerely request you to take it down, please? Can we take the banner down so the meeting can continue? Okay, so I'm going to adjourn the meeting. In that case, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. We can't do business with this going on, so we can all retire into the Russell.
colossal amount for anyone's reckoning, but that company is worth about £3 billion. So that's less than 1%. How are we going to effectively engage? That particular company have boasted about reducing carbon emissions by 90%, but it turned out they were actually deforesting places to do that and burn wood chips, and they're the UK's most carbon polluting company. And that is an example of that company would tie in with net zero, but in reality, it hasn't actually achieved that. So that's something we need to be careful of. And that is actually classed as now one of our renewables. So not all renewables are as green as what they claim to be, especially when we're burning wood chips.
Totally understand what you're saying, and that's why I'm saying as the metrics develop and more information comes through, we'll understand more and be able to make even more informed decisions. Do you want to comment about this? How that will work through. You talk about the 1% or whatever it is, equity we have in any company. Talking generally about any company, it's not what we do as an individual pension fund that creates the engagement and the power we have in the boardrooms. It's all of us grouping together and making that difference. And I think that power, that combined power, is really, really important in trying to make a real change in all of the ESG issues, not just climate change. I think that's a very important part of the work we're now doing. Hamza, do you want to add to that?
That's a really good point. And the issues over the metrics, making sure that everything should be factored in for the decision to be crucial. The influence that LGPS has as a whole, working across all funds, is large and it's that we have.
The other question was peer review.
That does happen with one of the advantages of having a full company. Accessible and Brunel is other things, full company. They do work together, they talk to each other, we talk about partner funds, central, and there is a lot of between ideas. I think you're right to raise the concern about green things, and one of my concerns was some of the very early because I'm not sure they're necessarily clear what the impact of that are. I think it's quite possible to have a lot of that kind of publicity is something that should
And the point about greenwashing, not only do we have companies that we say are renewables, but we also have companies that we define as fossil fuel companies that also have clean technology as part of their portfolio. So it's not clear, is it?
I'll come on to point 11.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments, please? Sorry,
Yes, come back to Councillor Walters. Draxford is the largest power station in the UK. The largest, the worst polluter. They've changed, they got biomass technology now. They produce 12% of all renewable energy in class less of greenwash, I say, in Great Britain. Right, that's right, you know that, that's fact, you mentioned that. So if we had to talk to them, even though we're only 1%, and I do believe that some of our people spoke to them, you play with the figures, you're very good at that, and not tell the whole truth. But Drax has done a fantastic job. I'm not calling you lie, by the way. But you bend I'm sorry. I apologise about what you're about, but you sometimes make the most out of figures. But Drax in itself has done very well to move to a massive operation, and they've moved mountains to get there. And whether or not biomass technology is the way we want to go forward, burning wood chip and everything, but it is classed as that, as you know. I think Drax have or commended for what they've done and not castigated. They're trying to move quickly. I think they're trying to move quicker. And they wouldn't have done that without our input.
Can I just say, we've obviously got lots of very opinions, reasons, etc., etc. Can we try and keep to the agenda? What we're trying to do here is to say whether or not the action plan we have is the right thing to do going forward. And if we can improve it, and you've got good ideas where we can improve it, we'll listen and we'll improve it. But let's try and keep the individual other stuff spoken about at the right time, please.
You've got to speak, but sorry, Chair, you've got to speak factual, and you've got to say, you've got to give both sides. You can't just give one side that fits the argument. You've got to give both sides. That's the problem with all this. We're only hearing one side of the argument, not the other. Sorry.
There's no need to be sorry. You have time. Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments about the action plan, please? Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. Mine is specifically about the actions, because, realistically, whether we all agree or disagree, the fact that we have this in place is positive, and the fact that we return individual organisations and the training that's been provided again is positive for all happened. We have a timing set within the programme that's presented to us today, which I think will be restrictive. I think COP26 is showing that with the changes that's been put forward. So in the recommendations, what I would ask is that if we follow the recommendations right through, progress not just pension, for the climate change action plan, and recognises the fluidity of proposed actions and the resulting changes which may occur due to what's happening. If we could add that on at all.
Isn't that what we're saying?
Well,
so you actually want it reworded? You're saying you want to reword it?
No, I don't want to reword it. We're adding on to it to clear, because we have timing scales and we have timings through 23, etc., etc. Some of the timings that are put forward in COP22 by the Chancellor will probably have an impact on that for us, and I think we should result in and recognise that in the public eye, so that we will be responsive accordingly to actions that we see.
Just to make it short, sweet, and meaningful, I think if we use that last sentence, that we will move with information, we will act according to what makes good.
So
yeah, and in that recommendation,
we'll recognise.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
We can all work.
Everybody happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very positive. Thanks, Mike. Yeah. That's very positive. Any other questions or comments, please? I don't see any, so we've moved the recommendation, the amended recommendation. All those in favour, please? Any against? And any abstentions? That's all it says. Abstain. But it is carried. Thank you. Okay, I'll make the same comment that I did on the last paper about some of the confidentiality of some of the work behind, because it's all, we all know it's related, but we need to put it in a form that we can actually take action with. So we've got item number 11, the climate risk analysis, and I'll move the recommendation, which is on page 63. Second, please. I'll second that. And Tamsin, would you like to introduce the report, please?
The Pension Fund received its second climate risk report last month and received a training session from UPS Central on the report. The report was based on investments held at 31st March 2020 and 2021. The report itself is formally provided to committee as an exempt appendix due to the commercial confidentiality of supplier intellectual property. The Pension Fund is also publishing a PFD report, which contains all the key elements of the report. Members are reminded that the analysis and figures in both reports are based on the available data. As this is dependent on what companies currently publish, it should be noted that this data is incomplete. The model requires a number of assumptions. The information in the report should be interpreted in context. Data is improving, partly due to pressure from engaged shareholders such as ourselves, but the sensitivity of the assumptions should be appreciated in interpreting the results of the work. Despite the caveat, the analysis is supportive of the fund's current investment strategy in that it shows that the year-end equity holdings continue to below the market cap benchmark in indication that the funds have been considering and managing climate risk. And it shows us first analysis. It is anticipated that as funds progresses towards the long-term capital allocation, these conditions will further improve. The report provides recommendations for incorporation into the contact plan consideration. These are as follows. Explore the potential options to monitor and manage climate risk in services classes. Continue to monitor manager engagement progress with key carbon intensive and profitable holdings. Continue to monitor manager approaches to managing climate risk within portfolios. And continue to monitor manager performance on carbon metrics relative to benchmark. The pension fund will continue to monitor and manage all financial material risks which is exposed.
Thank you very much, Tamsin, for the summary. Obviously, there's much more work in all the yellow pages and everything else there. I'd just like to thank the officers and LGPS Central for what they've done. It's been immensely complicated to analyse and rationalise it. We know that it's not perfect, and we know that we need to improve it, but we have that attitude of mind that we're going to do that, and that's why it's in the work programme for future action. I won't go any further at this stage of it, but I'll open up to any questions or comments, please. Councillor Walton first.
Thank you, Chairman. It is an interesting report. I disagree with the premise of the report. I want to get to where we're going a lot faster. And again, I will reiterate, I think disinvestment is the way to do that. I don't agree with the strategy the pension fund is taking. We can have a look, does engagement work? For example, this pension fund has £10 million invested in BP. That company is worth 70 billion. Therefore, we have less than 1%, way less than 1% in that company. Now, let's look at some of the good things BP did. For example, they bought a 24% stake in a 100% renewable energy firm, Pure Energy. But when gas prices spiked and that BP were making profits, did they back Pure Energy? No, they let them go to the wall. Where was our engagement? Maybe engagement doesn't work. Let's look at another company this pension fund is invested in. It's one of our renewables, 4.5 million, in a Finnish company. I can never pronounce it. I think it's Nest or Neste, something like that. It's worth £30 billion. Circa 50% of that company is directly or indirectly owned by Finland's government. The Prime Minister's Office of Finland directly have a 35% holding. If we engage the Prime Minister of Finland and say, we don't like some of the things you're doing, for example, on your renewables section, you have a palm oil supply that's responsible for 10,000 hectares of deforestation since 2019 in Indonesia and Malaysia. There's been human rights violations. So if we engage the Prime Minister of Finland and this renewable company is doing good things as well, and we don't know what you're doing, with our less than 1% holding, presumably we get told to to the lot because we only own a fraction of a percentage against majority shareholders. When we also look at our holdings such as Shell, that's worth something like 300 billion. We have 27 million pounds in that company. Again, less than 1%. Similar with Rio Tinto, significant amount for us, 25 million, worth 75 billion, less than 1% holding. And just rolling back to our oil companies in like BP, it was only recently announced that the EU's investment bank arm, the European Investment Bank, for 2022 is going to close a loophole to end all loans to all and
thank you, Lee, for the details. Obviously, my overall comment would be, why do we invest in any company? Because not all companies are perfect, and for many, many different reasons, financial performance, ESG in other areas, etc., etc. I still would like to make the point that it's not just our 1% investment in some of those companies that is the engagement. It's the combination of all of those, as I said on a previous point. The issue of why we have investments in some companies isn't that we are stock pickers, we're choosing them. It's because of the way that we're looking to reflect the market in investment terms by having passive investments across a market. And if they happen to be in the index, then we're in them in that index. Now we can look at we can look at things going forward. We've said that we're going to look at things going forward, but right now we're not really in the position to take the action that you want. Not because we all disagree with what we're saying, and some of us will actually. But, it's our investment strategy that looks at our asset allocation and what we're willing to get our returns. At the end of the day, we've got to pay pensions for 145,000 people, but we want to make the best difference in terms of ESG and responsible investment we can within that framework, and that's pretty much what we do, I think. William, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I just want to make a few comments, and I actually agree with, there's a lot about what you say, which I actually have a lot of sympathy for. But I think the point about collaboration, with 1%, you say, well, it has very little impact, but that's why we collaborate with LAPFA and with other people. It's really, well, it does have effects. It takes time, but if you look at what the big oil companies are doing, they're moving. And you're quite right to say, let's hold their feet to the fire. They may not be moving as fast, we may not believe everything they say, but they are moving because they're going to have to. Second point is, I think, again, the big question is passive against active. Why do we hold passive? It's because they're very cheap. And we may choose to say, well, actually, we place more value on being greener and being more responsible than on cheapness. That is a conversation I think we should come up in our strategy. Third point I just want to make is page 68, a really interesting chart, I think 4, about where the cars get generated going forward. And it suggests that what their forecast is by 2050, something like 1% generated by fossil fuel. I've seen a very interesting paper by a kind of third-party organisation called BNB, looking at the same kind of questions. Very happy to share it with anyone here. They've come up with a figure of, if we carry on their best case, if we carry on most likely case, something like 45% fossil fuels, 50% renewables, 5% nuclear. They've also done a huge paper, very interesting, on best case, if we all really get together and try and move to net zero by 2050. And even so, something like 21% will be generated from fossil fuels. And the reason is areas like particularly Northeast Asia and a bit of China, and a bit of North Korea and the kind of long end of Russia will still be using coal and oil and things like that. Conclusions I draw, and there's another interesting conclusion they come to, is that capital isn't really the issue of investing. It's more about time. Can we do it quickly enough? Trouble is that if capital isn't the issue, it's our leverage. But all we can do is withhold capital. Second, I've talked about a bit, some really interesting points coming out here. You look at what BP has done in the last week. They've just made a huge return of cash to the shareholders. There's a lot of money in these old companies. And if you simply divest and sell to a third party at a very price, they're going to get those cash flows cheap. I'm not sure it's a good thing to do. You then look at what Shell's been saying, what's been happening to Shell over the last week, and an activist is proposing to break up Shell into good Shell and bad Shell. I'm simplifying a lot. Again, that's an interesting thought, a bit like good bank, bad bank. And I do think that the value of Shell broken up will go a lot higher than it is as one company, because everybody puts a discount because of the dirtiness of it. So those are reasons why I think divestment on a company basis, if they're not changing, absolutely yes. But it shouldn't be going for divestment kind of just as a general policy. But I do think that the big issue we have is on passive investment. That's the question we're going to have to address over the next 2 years. Sorry, I spoke to quite a lot. There's a lot of interesting stuff there.
Thank you very much for the information. Mike?
Yeah, Chair, just to change or flip things a little bit, because obviously I have objections to the Chancellor's budget. However, one of the positives that came out, which we can't deny, is the increase from 1% to 1.1 in tech companies and research and development. It's huge. You know, and so we have to recognise, as well as being able to put a finger at those who recognise dirty, and we will also, I'm sure, have managers that are looking at development in the tech world, which comes in the future, which I think will see a snowball effect of being able to make from certain investments which we are cautious of. So I think looking at asking our managers to follow that through in new technology and it is crucial across the sector.
I think the key point is that we're looking at our strategy and our asset allocation in coming months. So you know, we regularly look at it. We don't do it every day, of course we don't.
No, but it's the first time that we've heard a Chancellor.
Yes.
They're 1.4 trillion and an increase of more than 60% in R&D. So yeah, very prevalent.
Okay. Are there any more comments, questions? I don't see any, so we've moved the recommendation. I'd like to ask the vote, please. All those in favour? Are there any against? Or any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, we now move on to item number 12, which is the work programme. Again, it's a comprehensive report looking quite a way forward. The recommendation is that we approve the work programme is on page 84. I'll move that. So second one. Thank you. Would you like to introduce the work programme, Tamsin, please?
Thank you, Chair. In the appendix, you can see the work programme for the rest of the meeting. There are 3 required changes to the test programme. The TCFD report is brought to this meeting, following the climate risk workshop in September, members felt that the review of the assessment strategy follow the funding schedule of the working department in January, where it's already on the work plan. And the DWP is consulting on climate and adaptive reporting. The proposed response on the committee is asked to identify it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tamsin. Are there any questions or comments about the work programme, please?
Very quick one. Yeah, from this morning, where's tobacco falling into that?
Yes, which you mentioned earlier.
We'll make sure that gets onto the work programme. Yes. Okay, Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. The review of the work of the Pension Fund Committee and Pension Board has been actually on there to be placed for quite a while. Have we got any update of when that might be addressed?
It's quite complicated. We've also got governance going on at the county council as well, from the cabinet and all that kind of stuff. So I guess it's all part of that thing, I guess. But if you go, just be patient. Just be patient. Try and sort it. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Mike, do you have a comment?
Same question, really.
Okay.
I think, to council on that idea, open voting, or voting as president, and we isolated to voting climate change, or with certainly with some of the voting aspects, because response from that, rather than blanket about it.
I think from a legal point of view, from a constitutional, that would be extremely complicated. And I much wonder what form of words and definitions you would be able to use to make that. Whether or not they would be supported by our legal department. I understand what you're saying.
I think we need to move away from the fact that we frighten them about the actual fact the engagement from non-voters is as positive and as negative as members.
Okay. Well, it's on. We've talked about the work, but it's on the work. We'll look at that part of the process. Okay. If there are no more questions, comments, I'll move to the vote. All those in favour of the vote.
Nobody against? Any abstention? Right, thank you. I'll now move on to exclusion of the public. There's nobody here, but I'm going to move it anyway. Sorry? Oh, yes. Yes, watch the vote, so it can switch to the video screen. Yeah. So item number 13, we now move to part of the agenda proposals we meet in closed session to consider the exact information in relation to agenda item number 14. I therefore invite the committee to resolve that the public be excluded for the remainder of the meeting on the grounds that discussions are likely to involve the disclosure of exempt information as described in Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and the public interest in maintaining and disclosing the information. I'd like a seconder for that, please. I'll second that. And can we take a show of hands with all for the exclusion? Any against? Any abstentions? One abstention. That's carried. So we're now moving to the excluded part. If we could stop the stream, please.